Good morning. I see people quickly joining the session. Good morning and welcome to Evaluation on a Dime. My name is Cristina Sanchez-Kerr and I'm a partner at Arboreta Group and the program design and evaluation lead for this organization that works with nonprofits, small businesses, and also the government sector as well. I am a current doctoral student and research assistant at the University of San Diego in the School of Leadership and Education Sciences, and I will be your primary presenter for today on ideas and solutions to quantify your impact on a limited budget. I have three wonderful co-moderators, co-facilitators for this session that I will have introduce themselves.
Hi, I'll go. Hi, I'm Ginedra Sykes, and I'm the Leadership and Organizational Development Lead. And welcome, everyone.
Hi, I'm Jessie Town Cardenas, and I'm the Training and Curriculum Development Lead from Arboreta Group, and my pronouns are she and her.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jamie Somerville, and I'm the Fund Development and Marketing Lead.
Hi, Christina. I think you're on mute. We're unable to hear you.
I am so sorry. The code of 2020, you're on mute. I deeply apologize that after the introductions, I continued on with the presentation without unmuting myself. So I apologize, and I will just go back to the learning objectives to briefly let you know that our background is in nonprofit. Sorry, I am getting some echoing. Okay. Our background is in nonprofit administration. Is anyone else hearing that? Our background is in nonprofit administration, and we work with small businesses and government contracts as well, but we will be coming to you. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. We will be coming to you from a nonprofit perspective, from the perspective that we know evaluation can be costly, can be a big time suck. And so we know that with limited budgets and limited staff time, that it is very important to know the free and low cost tools that you have available. And we will be discussing all throughout our conversation on the simple logic models and the evaluation plans that you can create, how to do so in a cost-effective manner. And in some cases, really, a lot of the tools that we go over are free because we are all about maximizing the free. So that is what we will be covering today. And I will be now moving on to ask you to share with me briefly whether you would rate yourself an evaluation novice or a practitioner. At this point in time, are you joining us today because this is the very first foray you've made into evaluation, or you've been doing this for some time and are just curious to get a little bit more information? I'd love to know where everyone's at. So if you could type that into the chat. All right, so thank you for sharing. I see some novices popping up, and this is exactly the right place for you. This is an advanced version. This is the sample platter of a basic introduction to evaluation, how to do this effectively for your programs and services just by getting started. And the most important step is just to begin. So having a plan in place and getting started is what we're going to talk about today. So what is evaluation? Really, a basic Oxford Dictionary definition is one that we'll be going off of today. And it's really just the art of the act of forming an opinion about the amount, quality, or value of something after carefully thinking about it. And that is really the distinction between having an uninformed opinion and doing an evaluation, is that you do need to do some careful thinking. But I guarantee that if you are a cautious consumer, that you think about what kinds of brands of computers are best before you make a purchase, if you research that car before you buy it, then you have done evaluation in your real life already. So for those novices, rest assured you have the skills to get started. We'll just talk about the steps. Okay, we are going to be starting with the why, because I know for some it is a little bit of a fear factor, and part of what we're doing today is demystifying what evaluation is and talking about its value, because there might be times where you begin to do evaluation and you start to feel like, oh, I'm in over my head, or I don't know what I'm doing and this is scary. And it's also very easy to get very busy with the other work that you are doing in your organization and to leave it by the wayside. So why is it important? Why is it an important part of your programs? It's not just for funders. It is a really important tool for ownership, accountability, and change. And I like doing things in threes, but I think you can probably think of some other reasons. So feel free as I'm speaking to mention your reasons for doing evaluation in the chat. But let me tell you that from a social justice and equity and careful use of resource perspective, evaluation is really key to doing a good job within your organization. So from an ownership perspective, this is really what gives the work that you're doing meaning. Someone is telling a story about the work that you're doing. It's important for you to be able to tell your story and define what your organization is doing by being able to produce some numbers and stories that tell that story accurately. For example, if you are setting up a food distribution program and your target is low-income families and seniors, if you aren't measuring who the people are that you are giving that food to, then you don't know whether the initial goal that you are setting for yourself is actually one that you're meeting. So being able to say, yes, this is the community that we're serving, and here is the data to back that up, that gives you ownership of the program and your staff a sense of success in accomplishing your goals. It also holds you accountable, because you might find that your initial goals are not what you're actually producing. And it's not about assigning blame, but about being able to determine the why. Why might it not be that you are meeting the goals that you set out to achieve? You won't know whether you're meeting those goals at all and what might be the reasons unless you are collecting some information about your program. So holding yourself accountable is important. It's also important when we are trying to hold others accountable, not just within our organization, but oftentimes as nonprofit organizations, and actually in nearly every sector, you're working across sectors with other organizations, and making sure that you as partners are holding each other accountable is really important as well. And then finally, change. Sometimes it's important to look at that information to determine whether there are changes that we need to make in our program to make it more effective, to meet the goal that we are setting out to achieve. And going back to the food distribution example, if we are finding that you are not actually surveying seniors primarily, maybe having data to show that and having some conversations with the seniors that are attending the food distribution program, you can come to learn some important information about why and make changes to better serve the community and meet the goals that you set out for yourself. So what is evaluation? Evaluation is a process. Evaluation is really the simple process of doing something over and over again with some thoughtful steps in mind. First, it's setting a goal. Every program or service has a goal, whether you explicitly state that goal or not. There is some reason why you are carrying out the program or service that you are. So, these things fell out. The conscious part is to just state what that goal is. And you might have more than one goal in mind, but again, we just want to get started with something simple if you're not doing any evaluation at all. So you don't have to set out 5, 6, 8 different goals. Having one goal in mind is sufficient to get you started, but it is important to be explicit. And oftentimes that can be the point where you get some clarity amongst the different people that are carrying out that program or service to make sure that your goals are all the same. So setting a goal for your program or service is the first step. The second is then to identify outcomes. The goal is usually a bigger picture item, such as trying to increase the graduation rates of low-income seniors at your high school. Identifying the outcome is exactly what levels are you trying to achieve? What is the cutoff for those individuals that you identify as low income? What are the rates that they have now? What are the kind of increase in rates that you want to see? And then selecting data points. So what are the specific pieces of information that you are going to collect to then help you determine whether you are meeting those outcomes? Actually collecting that information is your next step. And then doing something to review or analyze that data, and then reporting on it, which is really just another word for sharing the information that you collect and review, is the final step before you perhaps determine that you might need to make some changes in your program. Now, that program changes step is not always necessary and it's not always possible, but it is one that could lead to then redefining your goals and continuing along the path of evaluation. So we are going to be breaking this down in much more detail over the next 30 minutes. This is just the initial picture to remind you that evaluation is just a simple 5-step process that continues. It is not a one-time event. It is a continuous process of reassessing what the reality is of your program or service. So how do we get started? We get started with a logic model or theory of change. And we won't be using a theory of change today. I just want to mention it because I know that there are certain that there's certain terminology that is out there that can also be off-putting for people that are just getting started, but also is something to not be fearful of if you're seeing it, for example, on grant applications. Part of our services are that we also provide fund development services for nonprofits, and we see more and more funders are asking, what is your logic model? What is your theory of change to the people that are applying for their funding? And so we want you to rest assured that it is something that you can develop without having an expert come in and create one for you. You and your staff can determine what your theory of change is by producing a logic model that looks at some basic things. The logic model is really the big picture that helps to answer the why. What are you doing, and why do you think that will be effective in creating the change that you want? So as you can see, although there are not arrows here, this process really moves from left to right. Those inputs are the things that you start with, the resources, both tangible and not, that you begin with, and the people that you are going to be working with. It could be that you have a variety of groups that are going to be participating. You have staff, you have expertise that those staff have, you have supplies. That's where you begin to then create the activities that you're actually going to be doing. And a lot of people focus very hard on these activities, but aren't always then moving on to the next step of looking at, okay, we're doing these things. We're having these monthly seminars. We're having these peer connection activities, and mentors are meeting with our youth. But then what are we hoping to actually see from that? What are those essential basic outputs that we want to see? Do we want to see a certain number of people attend each session? Do we want a certain number of contacts between mentors and mentees? Defining those very basic endpoints is the next step in the process of then determining what your outputs are that will then lead to those changes, those outcomes, both short and long term, that really are the pieces of behavior change, change in thinking, change in knowledge that you want to see in whatever target population that you're working with. And you want to define those both in the short term and in the long term, and determine for your organization or for your program what short and long term means. Because there's not one right way. It's not that short term must mean within 6 months. It can be a variety of timeframes, but it's really important for you to know, and for everyone working in your program to know, what you mean by short term and what you mean by long term. And this part of the process is free, in so much as that staff time is not an extra cost. It is absolutely going to cost staff time. You should be having these conversations with additional stakeholders if possible, including any partners that you're working with, perhaps an advisory group of students or other participants in your program. It's always important to look at who needs to have a say in the process, but at minimum, having this conversation with staff is a low cost. At this point, Zoom might be required, but otherwise free activity that you can get started with right now. And once you have your logic model, then the next part feeds into actually getting evaluation started. So from this logic model, you can then begin to work on a plan that we've created a simple worksheet for. This evaluation plan basics worksheet is one that we'll be putting that up in the portal today, and it will also be linked in the chat and available on our website. So feel free to look at it now, to peruse it later, but we'll be covering all of the different columns on this worksheet today. The basic components are that you determine a goal, you set an outcome, you have data or metrics, and I'm giving you some of the fancy words because I want you to not be fearful of them when you see them on any grant application. But data and metrics is just another word for information. and then have a collection system, which is just the tools and process that you're going to have for collecting the information that you want to help you do your evaluation, and then an analysis, some kind of process where you're going to be carefully reviewing that information that you collect, and then the reporting piece. How are you sharing the information? Sharing doesn't mean a fancy long report. That's not the only way to share the information, but it is important that you are giving careful consideration to the different ways that you are going to share that information depending on the different groups that you're going to be sharing it with. So we're going to be covering each of those. Step one, the goal. What are your goals? Can be determined by the logic model. If you already have the logic model created, then really you're just popping some of those outcomes into the goal section. And you can create as many worksheets as you want. You can have one per program and list multiple goals within one worksheet. You can have a variety of different worksheets, kind of each focused on one goal. The important part is that your goal is really your big picture the objective of your program, what you're trying to achieve. And if you look at it as the reality that you're trying to create, that can help you see how you are moving towards that through your programs and services. So once your service and program is effective and it's been going on for a while, what is that going to look like for the people that you're working with? So setting that goal is the first step. And this is another really cost-effective process because it just requires conversation. Now, this is a step that we really like to integrate stakeholder feedback in. So you might need to have a little bit of money spent on some incentives. You might, bring people together at this point via Zoom, but you could have a socially distanced activity where you have snacks available. However you bring in the stakeholders to the conversation, the important part is that you try to connect with at least a small subset representative of the group that you're working with to try to get their input, because ultimately throughout this process, stakeholder feedback is just another way of ensuring that what you are doing is going to have the intended impact that you want. Stakeholder feedback can help you check some assumptions that you might be making about what is useful to the population that you're trying to serve that you might be right about or you might be off base on. So stakeholder feedback might be a small additional cost, but otherwise this is really just an investment of staff time and your brain power in determining your goals. So once you have your goal set, step two. Step two is another very low-cost, conversation-based step in which you are then putting some meat to those goals. So if what you want is to increase the graduation rates of low-income high school students, then your outcome could be that you want to see sustained participation in weekly tutoring by at least 80% of participants. And that eventually a longer term goal is that you want to see those graduation rates
have any sound
for people that are consistently attending your program to be 90% or above for 75% of the youth in those programs. The outcomes don't necessarily need to have numbers behind them. If you don't know what is even reasonable, then you might start by year one just collecting information, seeing what kind of numbers are out there, or comparing them perhaps to information that's already available through, comparing similar programs might be a way to give you a sense of what is a reasonable number. But the important thing is that you at least put some specificity to that outcome, and when possible, that you push yourself to start to put some numbers behind that, at least once you start collecting some data. So the reason why being specific is important, is that you are not really going to know what is your progress towards that goal if you're not measuring something. We don't believe that numbers are the only way to do good evaluation, but evaluation is a part. I'm sorry, numbers are a part of evaluation. It is absolutely critical. That is how we know that the 1 or 2 success stories are a trend and not an exception. So we want you to be realistic. You can't measure, for example, that you've made a drastic change in someone's behavior after doing a only 1 hour presentation one time in the year. So be realistic with the outcomes that you're setting for your program. Be time focused. Are we going to collect this information? Do we want to know this on an annual basis, twice a year, once a month? But the time frame that we're looking at. Most of all, make sure that it's something measurable, something that you can actually count and see, and that it is connected to that goal. And the third step helps you to really hone in on making sure that you are having something that is measurable, because the third step is where you focus on what the information that you are going to collect, otherwise known as the data or the metrics, what that information is that is actually counting the progress towards that goal and is helping you determine whether those outcomes are being met. So the data should really connect. The information that you are collecting should really connect to those outcomes, but also be very clear that you don't have to collect all possible data that might connect to those outcomes. That goal can start off as simple as one goal with 1 or 2 outcomes and still end up giving you the options of collecting 10, 20 different pieces of data. And especially if you have small number of staff, limited budget and time, you don't have to collect all of it. Getting started is the most important thing, or doing things consistently. So Ginevra likes to say, don't let perfection be the enemy of good enough. And I strongly believe when it comes to gathering information or data for your program, that you want to just focus in on the most important pieces of information that directly connect to those outcomes. That might mean that you were previously or thought about collecting GPAs, for example, for all of the students in your program. But if you're not actually doing any work to help participants increase their GPA, if you're not providing tutoring services or connection to tutoring or something along those lines, then you shouldn't be collecting that information. You also shouldn't be collecting all of the possible information that might connect, because in some instances, it can really result in watering down the results of your evaluation. So you want to focus in on what is the best balance of both quantitative and qualitative data. And quan is just a part of quantitative that reminds you that it's quantity, and qual is quality. So you want to focus in on what numbers and what stories are going to help you paint the picture of what your program is doing. And you want to do this in a way that both collects things in a formal way and in an informal way. So you are absolutely going to need to have a formal process for collecting the graduation rates of your students. And it is important when you're collecting those
Christina, I think you might be muted. We can't hear.
Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Sorry, trying out new technology isn't always effective. So I'll be switching over. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Great. I'm not sure where it cut off. So I'm just going to reiterate a couple of really quick points on data and metrics that are important to consider. One, that it is important to have a balance of stories and numbers, so that quantitative and qualitative. Okay, that quantitative and qualitative data is important, and also that it be gathered in a formal and informal way. So we're going to be talking in step 4 about the process for collecting that data, but I want to make sure that you all know that evaluation also happens in those times in between when you're not expecting something to happen, to be shared with you, but you want to make sure that you're prepared for those unexpected moments where someone, a participant, tells you, this program has meant so much to me because blank. Sharing those stories with you is not something that, I mean, you want to take those in on a personal level, but also you don't want to miss the opportunity to capture that story in your in the information that you're collecting for your evaluation. You want to have a place to put all of those stories. So having those informal moments actually feed your evaluation is really important. Having a place to collect any accomplishments, any goals met by the participants in your program that you might not be expecting on a regular basis, but you need to have a place to hold when that information comes to you, is also an important part of considering evaluation processes and data. So data and metrics are just the information that you will be collecting that answer the questions, that answer the questions, what am I looking at? How do I know this is working? It's really when you get the meat on the bones of, okay, I'm saying we want to achieve this. I'm thinking we need to look at that. What is the actual information that we're going to be looking at that tells us, yes, we are meeting this goal, or no, we're not quite on the mark. So once you've defined those pieces of information, and like I said, starting small is good enough, having a few data points is enough, then you want to move on to step 4, and that is creating your data collection system. Don't let data collection system sound scary. It's just the process for collecting that information. You want to create a process, though, that is clear, is something that you can do consistently, and that is really understood by everyone that's involved. This data collection step is really the backbone of evaluation, and it's about building good habits like brushing your teeth. You need the right tools, you need that motivation, and the motivation could be both a carrot and a stick. You don't want cavities, and so you brush your teeth. But it's about building those good habits that are going to ensure you're doing that data collection consistently, because again, it's not about the quantity of data that you're collecting, but it's about the quality. If you are asking anyone in your program to collect dozens of pieces of information, and you're not ensuring that they're clear on what those pieces of information really are, why they're important, how frequently they have to do it, and you're checking to make sure that that information is being recorded accurately, then I guarantee you, when you sit down to do that analysis, you're going to be disappointed at what you have in front of you, because garbage in, garbage out. You can't create good reports and do good analysis if your data is really inaccurate, if it has a lot of holes, if it's not really done consistently and clearly. So you want to make really sure that you understand and have written down, and that everyone else understands, some basic things. Who is collecting the data? Don't point fingers at each other. Make sure that the person, and it should be a role, defined by a role, not by an individual, who has the role that is the right role to collect the information that you need? Who's handing out those surveys and making sure to collect them? Who is going to the schools and getting information on graduation rates? Who is talking to participants and getting their success stories? Who is collecting that data? What tools are they using? The tools that they use are just as important as when they are collecting the data. So you want to make sure that they're really clear on what are the specific forms that they need to use, what are the specific places they need to collect and store that data, and then how will you administer those tools. The when is very important because it could give you some off results. We had an instance where there were some groups in multiple schools. Some schools were really clear on when they needed to hand out that survey and some were not. So at the end of the day, we had some surveys that were handed out 2 months later than at other schools. That can lead to some really different information. And so you want to be very clear on when those tools are going to be administered, when that information is going to be collected, and also how is it going to be, are these surveys that you're giving out or information that you're collecting, is it anonymous? Is it not? Is it through an interview process where there is a staff member that is asking questions and is filling out that form for the individual, or is it self-reported? The individual themselves is going to be filling out this form. Those little details matter, and it's important to just be really clear on what you expect and to come to an agreement with everyone that's involved about what this process is going to look like. And at the end of the day, you want to have some accountability measures, which really just look at how frequently are you going to be checking and how are you going to be checking that this data that you're collecting, this information, is accurate. It's, again, going back to the reasons for doing evaluation, accountability is a primary foundational principle of evaluation. So if you're not holding yourself accountable in the process, you're really not going to be doing evaluation effectively, and it kind of defeats the purpose. So it's not about punishing people, it's about oftentimes just answering questions. Sometimes people forget how to do a specific step, and checking in on them and making sure that they're clear is a way to help them do the work correctly, accurately, and ensure that you're getting accurate information for your evaluation. So what does this look like? What are some of the tools that you can use in order to collect that data? The systems that you have available for data collection are a little bit small on the screen, but let me tell you that you have a wide variety of tools. You have interviews that you can do, videos, you can take pictures. That can be a part of data collection. That helps to tell that story of what the effect of the program is. You also have some tools for numerical data collection. Surveys, pre and post are common and they're popular, but they're not the only way to carry out surveys. And oftentimes they might not be the right way. You don't want to do a pre-post test if you're doing a 1 hour presentation, because you're cutting into your time and you're not likely to see much of a shift in anything in that 1 hour. So surveys are important, but looking at the right survey tools that you could use, and always asking questions in a way that is really getting to the heart of what you want to know and is giving you some essential basic information without asking people to answer 20 questions that you're just curious about, but are either not going to do anything with or are not essential to the program. Also, you can have some basic surveys already available to you at a completely free or low cost option by going to whatever association or group is related to the kind of service that you're providing. For example, the National Mentoring Resource Center, if you're working with youth, is a wonderful website that has a lot of different information, resources on surveys, on the kinds of program details that you might want to consider in your program. And wherever you're doing your search, you want to look for terms like validity, so that you can make sure that these are tools that someone has looked at and said, yeah, these are good ones. This is something that is useful to use. And oftentimes you can also look at what is being used most recently to make sure that it's still, you know, just because it looked good 15 years ago doesn't mean it holds up now. We found some great tools, seemingly great tools that were brought out in the early 2000s, and then I couldn't find anybody that was using them after 2010. And so that told me, okay, this is probably not the tool to use. So some of the other low-cost options for carrying out evaluation, data collection, and actually storing your data is SurveyMonkey, Survey Gizmo, Google Forms, Zoom polls. These are all at least have a free version or a very low-cost version as well. And right now, I imagine that there are some organizations that are considering CRMs or client relationship management systems, and those could be a way to go if you have the budget for them. But really, if you're working with, you know, hundreds of participants versus thousands, CRMs are not necessary. You can work quite well with these free tools, including Excel, if you are just getting started with evaluation and you don't have the budget to invest in a software that is really complex, because having that software isn't going to solve all your problems. You're still going to need to really invest time in creating it, maintaining it, and oftentimes that requires at least a half-time person to really make that expense effective. So moving on to steps 5 and 6. How do you analyze and report your data? This is really where that social equity piece is critical to consider, because when you get the information, you have to do something with it in order for it to be meaningful evaluation. If that information sits in your Excel spreadsheet or sits in SurveyMonkey, then you're not really holding yourself accountable to meeting your goals. And it's a critical part of the participants in your program feeling empowered to give you feedback and knowing that you're going to do something with that feedback. So if you're sharing, if you're sharing that feedback, that reflecting that feedback back to them by sharing the results of what you learned from looking at that information, then they know that you are listening. They know that you care about your program being effective. So analysis is just a detailed review of your information. That detailed review is just looking at any outliers in the information and trends. You want to see what is common, what is repeated, but also you want to look at something that doesn't fit the trend, is outside of what most people said, because it could be that that individual that shared something that isn't a popular opinion is really telling you a truth that you need to know, or also that it's telling you something about the program that you need to consider or change that you might have missed otherwise. So you want to look at both the outliers and the trends, and you want to make sure that you are involving other individuals in this process, because it might be that you completely get tunnel vision and look at the information in only one way if you don't involve others with a different perspective. So how can you actually do the analysis and then move on to reporting, which is just sharing the information? You can use tools like Canva, PowerPoint, and Publisher to actually share a report. You don't have to create a long textful report. You can create some nice tables and include some images and highlight some success stories by creating a short 2-page report that you share with your funders. I guarantee you most funders are not looking at a detailed report unless they absolutely have to, and they pay people to do that. And most of program participants are not going to want to read a lengthy report either, but you can create something really meaningful to them in a brief manner that you can share with them either electronically or in person or via Zoom that can help them understand what the program feedback that they've provided has meant. And at this point, then you might be able to tell them how you are going to perhaps make any changes that could better meet their needs. So we're going to quickly skip on to a breakout session that helps you think about these different steps in evaluation and how you can begin to do evaluation, or if there's anything that you have questions about that perhaps some of your peers can help you answer. We're going to ask you to just take a few minutes in a breakout session and think about, do you have a goal or related outcome for the program or service that you're working on? Is there information that you can collect that relates to that goal or outcome? What are the tools that you could potentially use? Where are you going to store that data? And how can you analyze your results? In a few minutes, you're not going to have a chance to answer all of these questions, but pick one. Pick one, share it with your group, or if you're really confused about something, you can ask your group a question and see if they can answer. Otherwise, we'll be coming back to the main chat to answer your questions after this portion.
So if you're seeing your invite to join your breakout room, please go ahead and click the blue highlighted button to join your breakout room now.
I'm not seeing an invite.
Okay, something happened and we're just redoing those breakout rooms. So watch for that to come back up.
Thank you.
Thank you. In the meantime, I'll just also say that we dropped a link to the fillable worksheet in the chat. If you'd like to access that, it should also be downloadable.
I'm also not seeing the chat for some reason.
Okay. Okay. If you're seeing the breakout room, you can join it now.
Oh, I have one other, two. I have other individuals in my.
I'm not seeing it.
It's interesting. It seems that it's coming up for some people and not others.
I think it's if you log on to the regular Zoom, then you're able to access breakout rooms. But if you're going through the actual Live Well website where it's streaming, like I am, you're not being invited to it because you're not actually going through Zoom. You're going through another website. So I think that's the issue.
Okay, that makes sense. So I should probably exit and then go through Zoom.
No, you know what? Don't worry about it because we are going to use the time that we have left to go ahead and move on to Q&A. We don't want to waste any time that we have with you. So don't worry about troubleshooting for breakout rooms, but please do put your eyes on that worksheet so that we can use it while we do question and answers. All right.
All right, I'd love to take some questions live from the audience. So feel free to continue to type in your questions. Also know that we are going to be putting an evaluation, a very quick 3-question survey into the chat, a link for it. So please feel free to fill that out as we're continuing with the presentation. But also, if you have questions and you want to ask them by unmuting, you can do that as well. You can continue to put your questions in the chat. Someone was asking about, I'm not sure whether the question is whether you should or how to use a CRM for evaluation, but the answer is you can, and you should if you have the budget for it. I'm absolutely in favor of client relationship management systems. CRMs are I manage a CRM for a nonprofit organization, and it's a powerful, helpful tool. I just absolutely don't want anyone to feel like you have to have one, because they can run in the tens of thousands of dollars, even kind of at a basic level. You're probably looking at a $20,000 investment, and it is a great tool to use for evaluation because it can help to store all of your data, create some forms for you to put in your data. And most of the CRMs have built-in reporting tools. I have to tell you, few of them are completely out of the box ready. You usually have to do not only some management of them, but you do, when you get to the reporting piece, have to often make some changes. So as a person that filled the role of managing a CRM for an organization after they tried having no one assigned to manage it, and literally did nothing with it for a few years, I just caution everyone to make sure that they're factoring in not just the cost of the CRM, but the staff time to manage it. It at minimum needs a half-time person. Okay. Oh, CRM is a client relationship management system, and I feel like Salesforce is not one that's used in nonprofits, but it's a commonly known one. It's basically a cloud-based system where you can go in, and they usually have some built-in data screens that you can put in client information, basic demographic information, maybe some bits about the contact that you've had, but there's also tons of CRMs available for nonprofits from a variety of companies. Social Solutions is one, Apricot. There are lots. There's also a lot that are specific for a particular industry, like Donor Perfect is an example of a CRM that's just for fundraising professionals. I have to tell you, I don't have a preferred CRM because it really depends on the industry. One of the recommendations I do have about any tool that you are using is that you test it, that you try to do, if they have any kind of opportunity for you to test it for a month or to have multiple people do some kind of live demonstration. I would not pick a CRM alone. I absolutely encourage you to have some key people on your staff, on your team, be involved in that process, and that you really think about what you need from it before you make any kind of purchase. And ask other organizations that are like yours what they're using. What are the pros and cons? Look at things like customer service. That is a really key point. Make sure that they have good customer service because you're going to have questions.
Yvette has a question.
Okay, what is the? Okay. So feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question.
We know that Yvette has a question, so if you'd like to come on, Yvette. And there's another question about
Okay. So I think technically we're supposed to be wrapping up in the next minute. If one person wants to unmute and ask a question, we are going to be staying on. So I do want to say that if you have any additional questions, please feel free to email us to go to the portal. And I want to ask Jamie to go onto the final screen where we have our email information. Thank you. So info@arboretagroup.com. Also, all of us have the arboretagroup.com email addresses. So if you just put in Christina or Janedra or Jesse or Jamie at arboretagroup.com, we'll be able to answer your questions as well. And there was a whole lot more I could have said and a bit more that I intended to say about today. But I do want to thank you all for joining. I know that likely you're going to be encouraged through the portal to start switching over to the next session in the next couple of minutes. So what tool, sorry, I do have one more question that says, what tools for one-time class? One-time classes, I highly encourage you to do just a quick 3 to 5 question survey. Like the one that you're getting. If you actually click on the link to our survey, you'll see that we just are asking 3 questions, very brief, and always having a combination of some question that is measurable, that has either a rating system or a yes or no that can give you some numbers, and having 1 to 2 open-ended questions, 1 open-ended if it's 3. It's not a hard and fast formula. I just generally like to have 1 open-ended question if it's a 3-question survey, 2 open-ended if it's a 5-question survey. Just keep it simple, keep it focused on what you really want to know, and try to keep the questions as unbiased as possible, which includes having some options for negative feedback, not just the positive feedback. I've seen some people do tricky surveys where fair is the lowest rating that you can give them, and that's really not going to tell you what you should know and need to know.
If we have time for one last question, someone asked about sharing creative quantitative evaluation metrics outside of existing data and questionnaires.
Creative quantitative?
Yes, quantitative.
For a specific kind of program? If they don't mind sharing, I would love to answer that question, but I feel like that's a little bit more of a conversation. If they don't mind sharing their contact information, I'd love to answer that question outside of this space. And I do want to remind you that if you can just take a minute to do that survey in the chat, it's very brief. And I think, sorry, I'm having a hard time enlarging my screen. Okay, thank you everyone for attending. We do technically have a couple more minutes. I'm not sure, having not done this advance on Zoom before, whether they are simply encouraging you at this point to move to the next session or whether they're allowing you to stay on, but we're going to be staying on for a few more minutes and we can continue to answer your questions. I do want to again reiterate that the goal of today's was for anyone that is considering doing evaluation but is nervous to get started, to just dive in, give it some careful thought about what you want to capture, but keep it simple. Get started with a few simple outcomes and a clear process for collecting that information. And I guarantee you, just the process of going through at least a year of doing that evaluation and doing that data collection will tell you a lot about anything that you need to change for the future. So practice makes perfect. Continue to look at the information that you collect and at your way of collecting it, and you will be experts by the time that you have a year or 2 under your belt. Okay, I think our session is being ended. although I still see participants here.
Yeah.
So we can continue to answer those questions. One other bit that I didn't share is that there are actually a lot of tools, believe it or not, bits of information on some of the tools that I mentioned have information that you can learn from as well. So SurveyMonkey, oddly enough, they really are trying to also kind of educate their survey creators. They have some really quick tutorials. No, it's not, very lengthy. They tend to be about a few paragraphs in length, but they can give you some information about things like using Likert scales, which is just, those scales that kind of say great, good, fair. So do Google searches on any questions that you have. Contact experts if you really feel like you need some additional support, but just get started. Polls and Zoom for a quick evaluation, absolutely. Very useful.
Thanks everyone for
Thank
being
you.
here. Enjoy the rest of the advance.